live stream. It's really great to have you guys. My name is Margaret, if you didn't know. I'm here with Kyle Williams, and we're here to discuss advanced JSON. So, again, Kyle is here on the show with us. We do stream on 3 platforms. We stream on YouTube, we stream on Discord, we stream on Twitch with audio, if I'm not messing things up. So, since today is kind of a more advanced topic, we would really appreciate you guys asking us questions. It would help us tremendously. It helps Kyle tremendously. It helps us kind of know where you guys are at and what to do. So please do that. We love it. We really do. Real quick, our future live streams are here. We have Advanced JSON with Kyle today and tomorrow, and then we have a very nice shiny weekend. And after the shiny weekend, we have FileMaker Calendar Kit with Calvin on Monday. Our calendar kit is pretty cool. Claris took it, actually, and used it. So, installing Kyle's FileMaker hacks into the file. Kyle had many great things he's shown us, especially over like the last month. So he's gonna like pick 2 and go through a step-by-step process to show us exactly how to install them into a file. It should be very fun. On Wednesday, we have PayPal demo with FileMaker with one of our engineers. So if you ever wanted to use PayPal with FileMaker, this can be the one you want to attend. And on Thursday, Wolfpack is getting an update. So Calvin and Christian actually will be showing up to go over Wolfpack again and discuss the new features that have been added. So that is what we're doing. Again, if you have questions about subjects that we aren't covering, or if you don't like the back and forth interactive part of the live stream, and you'd like more specific training, please feel free to support us by buying our annual subscriptions. One comes with FileMaker, one does not. Both are 90+ hours of amazing video content, short bite-sized animated videos dictated by Richard, who is a fantastic presenter and a fantastic trainer. So we cover pretty much everything on the FileMaker platform. Cloud, server, Go, Pro, Web, pick it. We talk about it. We appreciate it. Feel free to do that. Okay, so I'm going to redirect now back to Kyle. Kyle, you said we had a couple intermediate beginning things to talk about. What are those intermediate beginning things that you would like to discuss?
So I have a few buttons on my file. There's JSON for beginners. It's the basics, and that's what we covered last week. And today we have JSON for beginners covering the list keys and list value functions. And then we have we're going to start introducing the JSON object type and the JSON array type and discuss how those work. So let me get into my screen share here. So yeah, last week we discovered JSON for beginners. These are the 3 buttons I was referring to. So we finished the basics. So today we're going to get into the list value and list key functions. So to start, we have just a very basic JSON object here. And so this is giving us our JSON. We know this is a JSON object because of the curly brackets on either end. And then here we want to list the keys. So what are the keys? The keys are the blue values here. So we can see this object here, starting with this curly bracket, we have this key, and then we have this key. So when we run JSON list keys at an empty path, our empty path are these 2 values. So if I wanted to go into one of these values, then I'm just going to do this to make it easy. And then, so we go into Kyle Williams here, and we see we get these other 2 key values. So that's how JSON list keys works. So you do your JSON, and then you do your path that you want to look up. So you're retrieving the keys that you need for your script, so that way you can get the data you need. So moving on, next we have an array. So we're introducing JSON list keys with an array, which works a little bit differently. So you can see there's a square bracket on the top and the bottom, and then we have 3 objects in here. Each of these objects would be a record. So I have essentially 3 records here with an email and an email type in each of the records. So that's an array of 3 objects. So when I use JSON list keys on here with an empty value, I'm looking at this array here, and it's returning the keys for these objects. So these are numbered 0, 1, and 2. So that's what gives us our result over here. So next we have JSON list values, which works very similar to JSON list keys, except this is going to work just like the list function, and it's going to return our various JSON objects. So the result isn't valid JSON because there's no comma in between these. As I said, it's just like the list function. So we can use get values to get this one result, and we can do get values 1 or 2 because it's a list with 2 values here, just like with any other list of values.
Okay, real quick, we do have a question from David. Kyle has an array within an array? Question mark.
Not in this example. This is the problem with trying to do this in a field because I can't use. So basically there's that, it's getting the values. So if I do watch, I'm just going to get rid of those, don't need them. So get values, get value, that's the problem I had. Okay, so then we have, I'm just going to copy this, we'll take it over here where we can see it again. So I'm going to close that. So here's our list, this is that list here. So I'm going to cut and we'll put that into our list of values. And then we have our value number, so then I can choose to get the first one or the second one. So let's go with the first one. And then that gives us our number 1. And with 2, we can get the second one down here. So that's how the JSON list values works. Any questions yet? Or?
Not particularly.
Okay.
I assume that, does everyone watching know what we'd use these for? Like, are you guys up to date on what we'd be using these for? And
yeah, if anybody hasn't watched the other videos from last week, it'd be good to watch those because we cover a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he said array within an array. So this is one array. You can have an array within the array. If I were to, we covered this in the beginner course, but if I were to say, put the 0, copy, am I doing that in the right spot? No. Okay, so this is one array, and then to put an array within an array, we could do that, and then I'm just going to copy. And then we can throw a 1 in here. So we're going to try to put an array within an array. So now it didn't format very well because it's such a small box here. But if I were to enlarge this, it would be a little bit more clear. But we can see that the array is starting right here because we have the little square bracket. And then we have the other square bracket down here. So, okay, so this created 2 single object arrays. So if I make this a 0, 0, maybe that'll be a little more clear. So yeah, so again, each of these just has one array value, one value in the array. But anyhow, yeah, you can have arrays within your array. That just gets a little complicated. Introduction to lists. Did I cover this one? Okay, so this is looking at the empty path. So yeah, this is just same as the previous record here, I think. Just has more items. So here we have 3 items in our list. So this is list values. Yeah, it's kind of duplicative of the other example. Okay, so here's what we were trying to get at. The array within the array. So here's what I was trying to do. I was doing 0, 1, 2, or 0, 1, 3, 4. It's missing the 2. And because it's missing the 2 value, we have null in the middle here. So I was trying to explain that we can get the array here of the email. So we're looking at object 1, or object 0 rather. So object 0, because it's 0 base. And then I'm getting the email, and I'm trying to list the values of the emails here, which that returns these 4 emails. So like I said before, the JSON list values function works just like the list function in FileMaker because it gets rid of any empty values. So, and then if we do the same thing with JSON list keys, it actually gives us all the values. So here we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is actually 5 numbers. So where this only returns the 4 values from the list values, here we get the 5 keys from this array. So this array has 5 different places for emails to go.
And then David has a question. When do you use JSON list value versus JSON get value?
So list values will return the actual JSON object. Get values gets the value from an element within the object. So, here's the object. So list values will get you this entire JSON object. And then you still have to parse out the individual elements within that object. So get element could also give you this one, but JSON get element doesn't really give you everything. You can get the entire array, but they both have their purposes. I find JSON list values is pretty helpful when I'm trying to get a found set, or usually I use JSON list keys and then do a value count of those. So that way I get 5 instead of 4. So list values will give you 4 items. So if I'm doing a found set and I'm looping through it in my script, I'm going to use value count here. And this will return the number 5, because there's 5 values within that array. So JSON get element is more to the point. JSON list values gets you a whole list of all the values within a path. And then if we go into here, remember we were talking about JSON string and JSON Boolean, JSON null, JSON number. So in these types, there's also 2 additional types, which is JSON array, or JSON object and JSON array. So here we're creating an object. So we're taking this right here. This is a formula to create JSON, to create a JSON object in itself, but then we're referencing it as an object. So we're embedding an object within within a JSON array that we already have, or a JSON object we already have. So this part up here is everything. What is that? It's JSON set element, Kyle Williams. So that's this outer layer here. So Kyle Williams, and then this up here. So this section right here I have highlighted, and that is giving us the object within our object, and it's with the key JSON. So we know that we're getting JSON and what is in our JSON. So this would be our emergency contact and all the information for the emergency contact for this particular client. So I put my wife's info in there. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. I don't see any questions yet, so let's continue. Combining multiple JSON objects. So here we're creating one JSON object. And so here's what it's created. Then over here, so I'm basically, here's where it's referencing this field. Okay. So we have, we're creating some new JSON here, but then we're adding the emergency contact from over in this field here. So this is creating JSON, it's putting it here, and now we're trying to bring this JSON right here into this new JSON object over here. So this is the emergency contact from this field here. So this is kind of the reverse of the previous example. So here we have Kyle Williams and my information, which is out here. But then we're embedding in a JSON object within our JSON object from this field. So no questions yet. So let's continue. Introduction to JSON array. So here we have a simple JSON array that we're creating, but we want to embed an array within the array. So here we have, again, we're creating the JSON object here. This is actually putting an array within the object. So this is this array we're embedding right here into the JSON object that we've created, which gives us this result here.
JSON, it does look intimidating, right? You look at it, you're like, oh, that's a lot of information.
It is. It can be intimidating. That's why we covered the basics last week, so that we can jump into this little more intermediate stuff this week. You have to stay
focused. Yeah, I got to stay focused and keep
Yes, to be intimidating. Okay. Yes, it can. So continuing on, importing a JSON array from a field and inserting into a new JSON formula. This kind of looks like the exact same as the last example. So apparently I got some duplication in here. It's putting this array into the JSON object again. Sorry about that. So this gets interesting right here. So what this is, it's demonstrating a problem that's in FileMaker. This can come up when you're trying to create a while loop and you're starting with an empty value. So here we have a JSON object, but we're using an empty value. This is not valid JSON. So when you try to get an element from an empty value where there's no valid JSON, it's going to return this error here. So the problem with this, if you're doing a while loop and you start with an empty value instead of an empty JSON object, is you're going to get this error. And when you use that error as a number, like here I put 0 plus, and then it's trying to get the result. This result is returning this error. And so when you're including 0 plus, you're getting it as a number. So what it's doing is it's pulling out this one here, this one. It's getting this little period in there, and then followed by another one and another one. Nothing else in there is valid, works in a valid number scenario. So it returns a value of 11.11, which could really mess up your loop. So if you're starting with this and you have an empty JSON object, your value is going to equal 11.11. And when you're trying to summarize all of the fields in a found set, let's say, you're already starting off with 11.11, so that's invalid number. It's going to throw your result off by that much. So that's something to be aware of. And so here I'm going to explain how to solve that problem. So here, if you start with an empty JSON object, so that's just the opening curly bracket and the closed curly bracket in some quotes. So that's an empty JSON object, which you can then use JSON get element, and then I can refer to that JSON object, and then I can try to get something from that JSON object. And since this is a valid JSON object, I get an empty value because there is no path to that element. So the same thing could be done here. So here we have an empty JSON array. So it's got the JSON object in the middle of two square brackets on either side. So that's an empty JSON object. So it's important to know the difference between those, and we're going to get to why that's important here in just a moment. So here you can see I'm trying to get the element from the array, and then I'm looking at an array that obviously doesn't exist, but since this is valid JSON and it's a valid JSON array, and I'm looking up an array, it gives me an empty value, which is correct. So here, continuing to work with empty objects. So here I have an empty JSON object, but I'm trying to assign an array value of 42 to this path. So the problem is that this is not an empty array. So if I put curly brackets like I show over here, this is the only difference between these two formulas, is I've added the square brackets to either side of the JSON object, which gives us an empty array. So now it knows that I'm trying to edit an array, and so here I'm adding a value to that array. So this is the 0 object, so the very first object of the array, which would be right there. And then invoice, so this section here before this period, so it's got a period in the middle, that's what's separating this. So here it's saying, look at this first object of the array, look at the invoice, I want to add an invoice, and then I want to add values to that invoice object. And so here I'm adding the number 42 to the invoice amount. So I have the invoice, and then here's the start of my invoice. So I can add more things to this invoice. If I want the invoice number and invoice date, etc., I can add that here. So Peter Gaines had a question.
Yes. In what specific situations do you prefer to use a JSON solution instead of an FM script, old school solutions with fields and variables? I'm trying to figure out where the advantage is when using JSON. Only situation I think of is working with the web viewer object.
So we talked about passing parameters to another script. I use JSON for all my parameters between scripts. So if I'm trying to pass data from one script to another, I have a special function, which I'm going to show you today, that allows you to extract all the data from the JSON in a very simple, easy manner that's only like one script step, and you get hundreds of variables created from that single line of code. So really powerful, much easier than trying to do a bunch of set variable script steps and try to extract each value or key independently. So we'll get into that in just a minute here. So that was the end of this particular section.
Real quick, before we poof on, does the whole objects and arrays and the errors make sense to everyone? That certain errors are going to turn you 111.11 if you don't have an empty object or an empty array at the front, or if I've said that correctly.
Yeah, so when working with an API, pretty much all APIs these days work with JSON. So you're definitely going to want to know JSON in order to be able to integrate with APIs. I do have some examples in here of APIs. I covered this last week. So there's one here that I can look up a zip code. So if I just put the zip code in here, I can do a lookup. And so this is showing me what the API is giving me. And you can see it's all in JSON. So I'm able to parse out this JSON and put the result into these fields. So just kind of demonstrate what it's giving us here. I'm doing this in the other window, sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay, so it doesn't give us formatted JSON, but it gives us all the information from this URL. So this is using their API, it's looking at the zip code, and then this is the information it gave us. And then we can use the JSON functions that we have in order to parse that out and to be able to populate all of our fields with that. And again, you can do it with just the city and the state. I can do lookup and see here if I do this again. Pull that back over. So you can see here I put the state is Washington, the city is Renton, the country is US. So that's important to have the country in there, then the state, then the city, and then it's going to return this. So then we can parse out that code here, and we can get all the zip codes for Renton, Washington. And then of course it's in the US. So there's my URL. Here's all the data it gave us from the API. So here I cleaned up the JSON a little bit so I can parse it out real easily. Continuing, we have external API demo. So this, let me go into debugger here, and we're going to just step into this. So this, last time I showed the cat facts, and this is getting the breed. So this API is slightly different. It's a little bit more complicated because there's 4 pages of data instead of just one. So having to go to the current layout, and then it starts a loop, and then we're going to loop through the pages. So I always do a loop count and then a little descriptor on there if I have more than just one loop count going at the same time. And we have loop count equals 1, exit loop if it's greater than 4 because there's only 4 pages. And then we're using this URL to get our data. Insert from URL. Let me get the data viewer going here. So you can see here, it just gave us all this information, and that's our page 1 of our data. So now we need to parse that data. So I'm getting the found count using value count, JSON list keys, and then I'm getting data from the data section of the JSON. It's giving me 25 results for page 1. And then here I'm starting my other loop. So it's a loop within a loop as we go through page 1. So we have our loop count of our page and our loop count of and our found count here is loop count. So this is the loop count within this loop count. So it gets a little more complicated as you get into more advanced APIs. So what I like to do is here I'm just pulling out the one object, so that way I can just work with that one object for the first record. So this is using get element, looking at the data, and then getting that first array. So loop count's already 1, so I want to do -1 so I get the very first record. So then what that gives me is a much simpler, much easier to follow JSON element there. So then if it's valid JSON, which is important because if it's giving us an empty value, we don't want it to continue here. So it'd skip over an empty value. So here's that fancy function I created a while back. JSON get elements as variables. So it's looking at the JSON, which looks something like this. And then this first parameter is, do I want globals? If I want all my variables to be globals, it'll give me all global variables for breed, cost, coat, country, origin, or pattern. So this lets me get global variables or local variables. And then if I have, we'll get into that in just a moment. So this is a prefix. So if I have like email and then I have the address, or say if I have the address and I want city, state, or whatever, I can add that prefix of address here, and it'll create variables that are address dot email, address dot city, address dot state, so on. So that's really powerful for when you have to extract data from a JSON object within your object. So here, just like that, I've been able to create all these variables. So here you can see breed, coat, country, origin, pattern from these keys here. So it looks at the keys, it creates variable names with those keys, and those variables are populated with the values. So pretty simple. So it creates a new record, it populates it. So if I pull this out of the way, so here we're creating a new record, and then it's just putting it into the fields. Then it loops through, another loop, creates a new record, and populates it. So, and then we'll commit records at the end after it's looped through all of those pages. So I'm just going to close this, and you can see it gave us 98. So that first page was only 25. So there's 98 total records, and it happens really, really fast too. So if I delete all records, delete all, you can see I have a found count of 0. And I'm going to get rid of this so it doesn't slow down. Okay, so import records from the API. One second, I got 98 records created. So just shows you how fast it is. It parsed out all that JSON in that short amount of time, created all these records, populated all the fields. I can now go through all of this. You can see it's populated all of them. So really cool, really powerful.
That's very cool. I'm going to do a brief pause. Do we have any questions about this specific? It's very cool. I thought that made pretty good sense, but everyone else feel free to ask questions. There is a conversation happening. What is the conversation? Okay, so I guess Peter Gein's question specifically about using JSON internally inside of FM. Like, obviously using JSON with APIs is very cool. You can do a lot of stuff with it, but is there a reason to use JSON inside of the FileMaker database if you don't need to reach out and grab stuff from other places?
Yeah, so I do have two methods. There's execute from SQL. I can get JSON from that using this function, which I'll show in a minute. And then there's also execute data API. So I'm just going to show this real quick. So here we're getting data from the FileMaker API. So it's we're creating a parameter here, and this parameter is going to be sent to the script step of execute data API. So here we're setting up our JSON parameter, and you can see I'm looking at the contacts table. I want a limit of 200 records, and I'm starting with the very first record. So I can set the offset to be 200 for the next set and 400 for the next set, and so on, to get more records. So if I do this real quick, you can see how fast we get all of this JSON data from 200 records from the context table. So again, this can be parsed out using the JSON functions, and it just shows how fast this is. So I did a couple more examples. So this one, I'm going to the context layout. I'm only getting 101 records, starting offset of 1, which gets me the first record to the 101st record. And then doing a query, I only want records with the first name that equal exactly John, or I think this is or operator. So I either want the first name to be exactly John with 2 equals, or I want it to be the last name to be exactly Jimenez. So let's see how fast that is. Record missing. So it can return some errors. So I'm not sure what it means by field is missing. Oh, I know what it is. Okay, I had an issue with one of the custom functions, and I removed the space from the field names, and then everything worked. Okay, so there we go. That's what was supposed to happen. So yeah, I just was fixing these names here because I had a space in them. But you can see right there, it got them for me really quick. I can see, let's see, first name equals John, or last name equals Jimenez. So that matches. First name John, and and then here's last name Jimenez again. So you can see it found the matching set of records. There's only a few in here. So it returned 4. So it found 4, returned 4 in the set. And then it shows you some metadata here. It shows you the total record count. There's only 200 records in that table. Shows me what the table was, what my database file name is. So it gives you a lot of really good information that you can use. It shows you how many times the record was modified. So I can see this record was modified 6 times. There's not many other ways you can get that number value. And then it gives you the record ID, this FileMaker's record ID, which can be used in API calls. So that's not the actual ID of the record. So the primary key is actually this much longer UUID value. But FileMaker's record number in the FileMaker's table behind the scenes is actually 83. So hopefully that makes sense. And we'll continue. So here I'm adding a query. Oh, well, we did query last time. This is introducing the sort. So we're using a similar query where it's either John or Jimenez for first or last name. And because this is 2 different objects, that's an OR operator. If this was in the same object, it would be an AND operator. So both would have to be true if this was one object. So here I'm trying to sort by the field name called last name, which again, I have to get rid of the space for it to work. Okay. And then here I wanted to sort descending by the last name and ascending by the first name. So then I do that, and it's already sorted. So it returns the same data set as last time, but it's sorted by these fields. So last name, descending. So it's going to start with a larger last name. And then if there's multiple records with the same last name, it'll sort ascending by the first name. So same as any other thing in FileMaker when you're trying to sort records. So you can see here again, the last name Jimenez. I think the last names are all the same. So, yeah.
Looks good to me. Gonna do a quick pause real quick. We did have a question from Bean805. For JSON and FileMaker, when you use JSON get element, is that still in constant time, or does it go through the whole JSON looking at each key?
So yeah, that's where we get into. We did a broadcast a couple months ago, I think it was, where we were talking about a list of values and the fastest way to parse out all the values from that list. And we were talking about how you can get the value from the very first list item, and then you can remove that from your original variable, and then look at the first item again, remove it from the variable again, look at the first item again. Through each loop, you're looking at the very first item. So that way it's not going through one item, then the next, and the next, all the way down the line until it gets to the matching value that you want. So it made it much faster to just look at the first value, delete it, look at the second, or look at the first value again, because the first value is now the second value. So if that makes sense. So that JSON works the same way. So if you have a long JSON array, so you can parse out that first array, and then you can use JSON delete element to get rid of that array. And then the next one you want to look at is the next, is again the very first array, because you just removed the first array. So it works the same way with JSON. If you don't use that trick, then yeah, it'll have to start at the top and it loops through everything trying to find the right information until it finally says, okay, here's what you wanted. And then it returns what you wanted. So yeah, to answer that question, it is much faster to remove them as you're going through them if you're looping through large data sets. And that's going to make your variable much smaller too. So the smaller amount of data you have to parse through here, the faster your script's going to be.
Okay, a bit of a follow-up. Does JSON get element behave the same way? So not really like a dictionary, but more like a list.
Yeah, it's going to work the same way. It's going to try to follow the path that you define. So it's going to look at the very first item. And if I'm trying to get responses, it's going to look at messages and say, nope, that's not what I want. Then it's going to see a response and go, okay, that's what I want. And then it'll go through it. So then it's going to look at the next set of keys. So if you're looking at response, but you want metadata instead, which is down here somewhere, it's going to look at the data first and say, no, that's not the correct key. Then it's going to go down here to the next one. So I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
Does that answer your question, Bean805? And thank you for asking. Okay, yeah, he says thank you.
All
okay.
Right. Yep. And then what is this? So this is showing putting them together in the same object. Works as an AND operator. So this way it's looking for both of these values to be true. So if, first of all, let me correct the field names. And then do that. So remember before it had like 4 items it found. Now it only has 1. So it only found 1 result. So that way, that's how you can do an or an and operator when you're trying to do a query. To do an and, you put it in one JSON object. If you want to do an or, then you separate the JSON objects into 2, like we did here. So hopefully that makes sense.
I assume so. I don't see any like frantic typing happening, so I think you're probably good.
I'm going to save the convert tab thing for tomorrow. That's a really fun one, but it's a lot to cover, and we don't have a lot of time. So.
Oh no, we're getting towards the end.
So. You mentioned JSON locally. So here, I have a bunch of demo files here. There's 6 demo files, and the first 3 were created by Steve SSH. I would love to get him on our show here to talk about these 3 files he made. So I use these functions all the time. So to for example, it's using execute SQL here to return JSON. So if I run an example, so it just calculated this and it returned all this JSON right here from this formula. So this is using execute SQL, but it's returning JSON. And there's also an option, like if I turn that true to false and then run the example, you can see there it didn't format it, but it's still showing it all. So this is unformatted. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to spell out true, you can do 1. So there's one of the first things you want to learn when you're learning the program is the difference between true and false. So I can do true here, or I can do a 1 here for true. Likewise, I can do a crazy number like that, which also equals true. So there I run the example and it thinks, oh, that's true. If I do 0, that's going to be false. So you can see there it changed. So it's really important that you learn the difference of true and false. Like here, if I do false without any quotes, that's going to return the same thing. So there's lots of examples in here. So I definitely urge you to go through this. and also watch the video he created on this. This is some of the most powerful formulas ever in FileMaker. You can get so much information. You can get it in so many different ways. You query everything. You can use where your favorite number is not null, which where your favorite number has a value, basically is what that's saying. So here, all of these favorite numbers have a value. If I were to do is null, and then run that, then I get the null values. So it's good to learn a little bit about execute SQL and how you can leverage that to get JSON in FileMaker. Actually, let's continue through these real quick. I'm just going to do some brief examples of each of these because these are my favorite functions anywhere.
I mean, might as well, right? That's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, we're here to talk about JSON and what you can do with it. So this is definitely some more advanced stuff, especially if you dive into the custom function itself. It's really hard to look at the custom function because it's really complicated, but he explains it pretty well here. I'm not going to really go through and explain everything here, but we can jump into the examples here. So here, again, he did a big video on this, which I definitely urge you to check out. But it's JSON Query, and here you're looking at the JSON. So it's looking for the ID where the ID equals 907, and it's a number, and then how he wants this returned. So then he runs it, and then he gets the ID equals 997. Well, actually, the ID equals 1 here. Comparison value. Okay, so again, check out his video. He explains it really well. I use this when I need to do some querying.
Not to interrupt, but I'm going to interrupt. Sorry. Not interrupt, but I'm doing it anyway. Ruben has a quick question. I format a numeric value as JSON string. Is there an advantage of using JSON number?
Yes. So when you format let me go into data viewer here. Watch set. Okay. So JSON set element, and I'm just going to start with empty. And then here, okay, so what do we want to do? Number. Okay, so the number could be 1, 2, 3, let's say, and then JSON string. Okay, and then we want also to see that number as a number. JSON. Number. Okay, so evaluate. Format elements. So here you can see it's giving it quotes. Here it doesn't have quotes. So the difference here is when you start, like, if you need to add some zeros in front of it, this is where it gets very different. So what am I doing wrong here? Oh, because I'm feeding it a number instead of putting in quotes. So if I put, maybe I'm getting fed this information and I'm getting it as text, and then I evaluate it. You can see here with the, this is a number string. Just make that a little bit more clear. So you can see the number as a string, you get to keep those zeros in front of it. But if you do the same thing as a number, you lose those zeros, and that could throw off your script, especially if you're working with authorize.net, which requires, I think it was 8 zeros in front of it. So there's a certain number of zeros that you have to have in front of the number. I think it was a total of 8 digits that it had to have, and it couldn't be less than 8 digits. So you have to have these leading zeros in front of it. Otherwise, the API doesn't know what you're trying to do. So it is important to know when to use JSON number versus JSON string. JSON orders the result based on the value. So yeah, it sorts the values based on the key element. So here I have JSON string, then JSON number. But if you look down here, it's alphabetical. So I'm starting with JSON number, then JSON string. So it's the opposite of what I had in my formula. So yes.
Okay, does that answer your guys' questions, Ruben, David? You good?
So yeah, please check out the videos that he created. I would really love to get him on here because he knows these functions inside and out. He created them. There's tons of different demonstrations here, and then he'll explain how this file works a lot better than I can. This one I really liked. So this function that he created, it compares JSON A versus JSON B, and it tries to find the differences, and then you can get it formatted in different ways. So this is really tall. So compare JSON. So it's looking at them. These are the exact same, looks like. And then these checkboxes change how this response looks. So if I don't want to check either of those and I run it, so they're just giving me empty. So you can have it give you the information in different ways. So again, watch his video on this. It's really cool what he does. So here you can see key food was changed from broccoli to sandwich between here and here. So it's looking at both of these, and then it's giving you a response, showing you what was changed. And again, you can select these to give you a slightly different response. So here you can see the difference between added entries, changed entries, or removed entries. So if an entry was here, but it didn't exist over here, then it would show up under removed entries. So here it shows that the element of food was broccoli in value A, but then in the B section, it changed to sandwich. So this is really good for audit logging, and just anytime you have to compare one JSON object to another, JSON array to another. Super helpful. There's a ton of examples here of different formulas and different ways you can view this information. So yeah, definitely check that out. That's some really cool stuff. This I showed off on a previous broadcast. So this allows you to look at the found set of 200 records here. So I'm looking at the current found set, and I'm looking at trying to get what information I need out of it. So here I'm defining the path that I want to assign everything to. So the path, get nth record, it's looking at the primary key of the, from looking at the loop count, it's getting the primary key of that record, that nth record. So get nth record from this field, this is the record I want. So as it's looping through the while function, it's getting that first record, then the second, so on, all the way to 200. So if I clear it, go back into it, you can see how fast that populates all the data. And if I scroll down, you can see it's got all 200 records there. And then I also did some other demonstrations of how you can organize it by name. So you can see it's going to sort these as it, all the JSON functions, they sort things as it's building the JSON. So this is kind of cool here because now, just like that, I can clear it. Just like that, I can sort all these records, and I can pull all the data. So if I'm creating a virtual list, I can use this, and everything's already pre-sorted for me. So very cool. And then, again, I created a bunch of different examples here. We created a video on this, so please check that out to learn that in more detail. So this is another demo that I demonstrated a while back. So this is how you can use JSON to create virtual lists. So here I can select what virtual list I want. So this is a list of the value lists that are in this file. These are FileMaker value lists by their name. And so if I want to search for staff, use this value list. And then I go down here, I can see all the items from that value list. And then I can also search this. So if I want to look for somebody with that name, I can do that, and I can select it, and it shows it down here. I can also do a multi-selection with that same list, same value list. So again, I can do the value list of credit card. I updated this notification to use a web viewer. So that's kind of cool. Before I had the little slider object with some buttons on there that had conditional formatting, and it was a lot of work, and then it didn't allow me to edit anything while that notification was showing, which was a huge problem. So that's why I created that alert notification in the first place. So it's in response to Richard. So here you can see I changed the value list to credit card, and right here it shows that the result from the other value list. Again, I can select one item, I can select multiple. If I want to select a certain year, I can do a find like that, and it actually highlights the numbers. So this demo gives you a lot of really cool tricks. And then if I go over to this section over here, I have a number of different sample formulas. So this is another custom function. It pulls data from the field, from the table staff. So from the staff table, it's pulling all this information. So the ID is based on this field here. And then what I want to show for the value is defined by this right here, where now if I wanted to include, say, the staff ID, I want to use this little dash separator between the fields. And then maybe I want to also include the state that they're from. So just like that, I just I clicked out of it, which committed the records. And now you can see that it shows the ID with a little dash separator, the first name with the space separator that I put in right here, and then the last name, then that little dash separator here, and then the state they're from. So really cool function if you're just trying to create some virtual lists. So here's that virtual list in action that I just created from that formula. So again, if I were to take this out, return it to how it was, go over down here. Now you can see I just have the first name and last name. So that shows you how easily you can control the JSON. You can control what it's going to show you when you're creating virtual lists. In this, I also showed how to get a JSON response instead of just a list. So here, if I'm selecting one of these, it gives me the response in JSON. So I get the ID as well as the value in a JSON array. So if I want to select multiple items, I can do that, save. And now here I have multiple items that I selected. So if I just want the list of items, I can deselect this. I go into here again, and I'll do those 4. So here's the 4 that I selected in list format. So again, I added a link to the video so you can watch it all. I think this was kind of the highlight of it. It was color selections. So here I can select multiple colors. I did a little color swatch here, which is a container field that expands a single pixel to fill the whole container.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, so that way you can scroll up and down really quick and easily. So it's a virtual list. So this is all in a JSON variable. So it's just parsing out the JSON variable and then displaying it in a way that we can interact with it. So that's leveraging JSON to create a value list. Sorry, going too fast. Okay, so to leverage this JSON, so I'm creating the formula right here, which creates the JSON that I need. So here's my JSON array, and using that JSON array, I can then go into here, and I can select and deselect these. I can also perform a find. So if I only want the values at F255, I can do that, and it highlights where the results are. So really cool. Then I can save it, and it changes it. If I want the JSON response, again, I can select that. So that should have a few. So just like that, I get the RGB values and the hex values in my response. So
oh, that's cool. That's very cool. Real quick, Scott wanted to know if the color selector works on Windows by any chance.
This color selector does. This works on Mac or Windows. So I have to actually, let's switch back here. Okay. So there's a global variable that gets flagged when I select that. So this color selector does work on Windows or Mac. I did demonstrate also this. This uses the Mac OS functionality. So this is actually in your operating system. So it's using a web viewer, which pulls up this. I can then go into here, and you can see here, this is part of the Mac operating system. It allows you to select the color. So I can change it to any of these colors. You can see it changed right away when I selected those. I can also go into here, and I can manually modify this. So FFF is white. It's probably not a good example. Let's maybe use zeros instead. So zeros, that's black. Or I can do a gray if I do A. So there's 6 characters here, it's hex. So just like that, you can manually change the color. And when you go through the records, there's a function in there that changes the color as you're going through. So if I go into here, you can see what the HTML looks like. So there's a function right here, set user data, the color from your field. So this is a function you can call with the FileMaker 19 function, script step, I mean. And then you can pass it this parameter, and then it looks at the element by the ID, which is this input field here, and then it applies that color. So that's how that works. This input tag right here, that's what allows it to use Apple's functionality for selecting colors. So really cool trick. I wish it worked on multiple operating systems because I love how that looks and how that feels. For Windows, I did create this one though, so you can do this and scroll up and down, and also you can add the little search functionality if you want to use the names of the colors. So, and then so here's the value list. That's what I was using here. And then it just gets the ID of the value list, the name of the value list. So it references everything by its ID. So when you go into here and you select one, you can see here value list ID number 1. So if I want to go to staff, which shows over here, ID 2 is staff. When I select that, it changes the value to 2. When I go down here, it's looking at this ID, and it's looking at the value list by its ID. So that's how that works. So again, I can go to phone type, and it gives me only phone types. So yeah, again, I put all the links here so you can check out all the videos so you can get more in depth with it. This one I've talked about many times. So this is my fancy custom function where you can go into debugger, data viewer, get both of those open. So I put in a note in there important to be able to open these first so you can see what's going on. So you can see here current, it's empty. And then if I use JSON get elements as variables, it steps into here. So I have some JSON that it works with. So here, the JSON parameter, which is set inside of this button. So this is what I have loaded into the button, just as sample JSON data. So you can see here's this one section that's at the path, the empty path. And then we have 2 JSON objects embedded into this. So this demonstrates how to get these also as variables. So as we step through here, you can see this 0 means that I want local variables. If I want global, I'll make that a 1. But since this button, we're trying to get all local variables, I'm going to go through and so there's our JSON, so you can see it. And then you step into it, it's going to get that first level of keys first. So it's going through the level of keys. So here we're getting all the IDs here. So you can see here it does a variable, puts a $1 sign in front of all of these, and it returns all these as variables with their IDs from right here. Okay, and then if we go into the next step, we're looking at the employee variable right here. So you can see I'm looking at the employee variable. It's valid JSON. It has our JSON object in it. So then we're going to parse out the employee, which is right here, the employee, so you can see it all formatted. And so now we're going to just parse that out real quick. So since I have this prefix right here of employee, you can see it parsed out all the JSON. It put employee dot and then the key element from inside of that. It's important to do that because here I'm also going to do client email, employee email. You can't have just email because then it'll overwrite the previous variable, which is why I added that prefix in there so that you can keep those separated. So then we go to the next step. So now we have all these client phone, client name, last, first, email. So that's how you can keep them all separate. And so I'm basically bringing the path, the path of the object and the values into my variable name to keep them all separate. So, and then if I continue, refresh object, so it's going to clear it. And then I shouldn't have closed this just yet, but here demonstrating the same thing. You can see here all the locals disappeared the moment the script was done. If I want to make them global variables, I just toggle this value to 1 or true. That's a Boolean value. So again, here's that. We have a global JSON. And then again, we're parsing it all out and it's returning it the same way. So here I have the IDs and then I have all the employee values, and next we'll do the client. So here it's parsing out the client object into all the individual variables. So this is how we can use JSON, and we can parse it out without having 25 script steps to parse each of these different individual items out separately. So this, you can actually put this in a let function and do it in one single script step and have all of those variables created instantly. So it's another reason I absolutely love JSON. I use it every day. It just makes my life so much easier to be able to have that function and just be able to parse it all out like that. So since we used global variables, I can go in here. All the global variables are still here. I can use those in any script. So very cool. Any questions?
No. I mean, I've run. We got Peter Geens. Check the ID shift value? Question mark.
ID shift value. So yeah, 3, 2, 1. So again, I was pulling the JSON from this variable here. So ID shift, that's the local one, so it's not going to apparently have slightly different JSON here. The joys of doing this live.
Right? That's the way it goes. Guaranteed. It's got to be one every
I think what happened was I was editing the function. So if you use the one from my YouTube video, I know that one works flawlessly because I've been using it forever. I'm not sure why it's using that. So let's do some debugging here.
I love the script debugger so much.
Right? So here, ID shift 6, 7, 8, 9 globals. Huh. Yeah, apparently I put a bug in there. Okay, I'll work on that.
We'll find it somewhere.
You go to the one on my YouTube video. It was working flawlessly. I did some updates to it recently to try to make it work better, but obviously that didn't work apparently.
No, it's good, Peter. Bugs are it's just the nature of building anything in code.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a bug. So, it's gonna come find you.
Yeah, you can see here I did a video on this. This has, if you go down to show more, this has a demo file from that video, and it was working flawlessly there. So check that out. You can see Steve SSH commented on it. So he's a good friend of mine. We've discussed a lot of his functions in the past together and worked on them.
Awesome. Well, not to preempt you, but we have gotten, I think, to the end of this wonderful live stream.
Yeah. So tomorrow we can work on these last 2 buttons here. We'll get into the helpful custom functions that I've created, as well as this convert tab files into JSON. So some really cool stuff to look forward to.
Again, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. This has been really fun. We did get more advanced as time goes on. Tomorrow will be very advanced. I'm kind of content to let Kyle go as advanced as he would like, quite frankly, and cover everything. So, again, thank you for asking questions. Thank you for interacting. It's great having him on. Thank you again very much, everyone. You have a good one. It's good to have you on, Kyle.
There we go.
Bye.
And the guys just stepped up the whole way. Calm, cool, collected. The quarterback, great read, good patience. More importantly, great job up front protecting this quarterback to give you a chance. And that's all you can ask for.
Trying to rally down 10. 9:25 to go here in the fourth. Short motion by Amendola from the left. Brady takes the shotgun snap, stands in, throws it left for Amendola, reaches up and snacks a high throw and lands inside the 10, rolling to the 9. Ball slightly behind him, but Danny makes the grab.